Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf ayin aleph. You're going to be hopefully more pleased with this daf. It's going to be a little simpler than the last few. We're starting the 8th chapter, and the 8th chapter is also called the chapter of ta'arovot, of mixtures. It's a classic chapter because this is a topic that comes up in many other masechtot. So if you're feeling like Zevachim is very specific, we're now going to talk about something that's more of a broad topic, although within the light of Zevachim, which is mixtures, combinations, bitul. If you remember, there's a general law in the Torah that comes from the Torah law that acharei rabim lahatot, we go by majority. So that means that things can be canceled in a majority. So if you have a majority of permitted things and a forbidden item, right? Generally by Torah law, it's canceled, it's nullified. If it comes to kashrus and eating, which is not what we're talking about here, but then there's a chav shishim, right? The rabbi said, well, if it's a greater ratio than 1 to 60, then you can already taste it, and then we're going to be more strict. And there's all sorts of cases where we saw that there aren't laws of nullification, either because something has significance, like in our case, we're going to see it's an animal and it's a sacrifice, and you can't just say, or maybe it's not a sacrifice, but it's mixed up with sacrifices, and it's something that's, because it's a whole animal, you can't just say, oh. That's why we're very careful, by the way, about bugs in food, because a whole creature, forget about, a little bug, whole animal, you can't just say, oh, nullified. So we're going to have all these laws where animals get mixed up with each other. It could be sacrifices of different types. It could be sacrifices for things that can't go on the altar. And there we'll talk about different categories, all sorts of situations. And the issue is going to be that on the one hand, we don't want to, right, we have this problem. Let's say you have something mixed up with things that can't be offered on the altar. So you can't offer things that can't go on the altar. So you can't just say, oh, let's bring them all as sacrifices. On the other hand, if you have to destroy everything, well, there's a problem. We don't want to ruin kodshim. We learned about that before, right? This machloket about, can you bring it lebeit hapsul, right? Can you take something that's sanctified and then say, can you put like the truma spices into the meat, because now you're going to have to destroy the truma in another day when it becomes notar. So we also don't want to destroy. So we're kind of pulled in different directions, and in different cases, different things will it's like a classic situation where you have to choose your battles, choose your issues, which one is more important. So we're going to start our Mishnah in the bottom of Ayin Amud Bet. See already, Amud Aleph is only 2 lines, pretty short daf in general. Kol hazvachim shenit'arvu b'chataot hamitot o b'shor haniskal. Okay, first we have to find what's a chatat shemitot. Okay, we've learned about this before, but there's 5 kinds of chataot that if you have a sin offering of a certain type, or something happens to it, we'll see, then there's nothing you can do about it and it has to be left to die. It's actually one of these very sad situations because especially from the perspective of tsar balei chayim, again, you have these different interests and sometimes one wins out over the other. They basically leave the animal, they don't feed it, and they leave it to die because there's nothing else they could do with it. So what are these issues? These are issues where there's nothing you could do, it's completely disqualified and can't be used for anything else. And that's why it has to be left to die, so that somebody doesn't accidentally either benefit from it or use it for some other sacrifice, which is also a problem. So I'll give you the examples. A chatat, that their owner died, and therefore no one else can bring that sin offering instead of them. You have a chatat that the owner got atoned from a different sacrifice. Now they designated this animal, then let's say the animal gets lost and then they used a different one instead, and then they find the original animal. A vlad of a chatat, like the offspring of a sin offering. So if you have a female animal for a sin offering, and that once you designate it, it gives birth. A tmura, if you did a substitution for a chatat, you can't bring it on the altar, even though normally tmura you do bring on the altar. Again, even though you can't do tmura. Okay, and there's one more that right now is eluding me, but those are the chataot shemeitah. There's 5 of them. And a shor niskal. Shor niskal, okay, these are our 2 examples where your sacrifices, your animals that you designated for sacrifices get mixed up with either chataot that have to be left to die, or a shor niskal. What's a shor niskal? It's an ox that gored a person and was convicted. And now that ox is to be left to die. There's a big machloket, there's actually a machloket at what stage the shor niskal is. That was what I want to say about the machloket, that's a side point. But both of these things are forbidden to benefit from at all. Not just that they can't go on the altar, which is going to be the next category, but no one can use them. Okay, they're forbidden. I'll use the language the Gemara is going to use later. Also lehedyot. In other words, they're forbidden legavoa. They can't go on the altar. And they're also forbidden to anyone to benefit from. Okay, these are things that are completely asur b'hana'ah. And if your Zevachim get mixed up with these, as the Mishnah says, afilu echat biribo, even 1 in 10,000. Okay, we'll get back to this language later because, well, you'll see it soon. But in general, it sounds like they're talking about, it's actually a weird Mishnah. Usually, when we talk about mixtures, one thing gets mixed up with a lot of things. Here, everything is plural. It's Zevachim, sacrifices, but it could mean any Zevach, really, any of the sacrifices. Could be one that gets mixed up in shor and skal, chata'ot, metot. Sounds like in many of those, but then even 1 in 10,000 doesn't make any sense. Even one sacrifice in 10,000 shor and iskals, or 10,000 things that can't be sacrificed. Yamutu kulan, they all die. So the afilu makes no sense because it really should be the opposite. It's if a shor and iskal gets mixed up with all your sacrifices, even if there's just one of them in 10,000 sacrifices, we still have to leave them all to die. That's really what the word afilu is coming to say. So it really doesn't match the simple reading, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. And the Gemara is going to just flip it and say, okay, it's not, because if you remember, we had this in Sanhedrin. I'll give you an example. There were nisrafim and niskalin, and nisrafim, and every time they said, whatever they start with is usually the one that fell into the mixture or got mixed up in the mixture of a bigger set of items. So the Mishnah really is set up to sound like they mean one sacrifice that's in a lot, but the continuation sounds like it's the reverse. Could be many sacrifices with just one chatat that has to be left to die, and all these animals, crazy halacha, have to be left to die, right? Because there's no way to fix this. Okay, laws of bitul don't apply. You can't nullify the animal. It's an animal. You can't just say, oh, it's nullified, and it has sanctity. So like you can't, and you can't bring these other things on the altar. That would be sacrilegious, and there's nothing you could do in this situation. Okay, so it's a very sad situation because you have to leave a lot of animals to die. That's the halacha. Second case. According to Rashi, this is the topic sentence, and then we're going to have a bunch of examples of this, even though not all the examples actually fit into this topic words, okay, this topic phrase. If they got mixed up, your sacrifices, because there's always going to be sacrifices in this Mishnah, your sacrifices, meaning what does it mean sacrifices? Your animals that you designate to be sacrificed. They're still alive, they haven't been slaughtered. You have your animals get mixed up with an ox just for example, an ox, that something was done wrong to it. Okay, it's not exactly accurate phrase because some of them, the animal did something wrong, not what was done wrong. The main category that this is going to be, it's something that cannot go on the altar. But it's permitted to other people to benefit from, like regular people, hedyot, okay? It's just not allowed legavoa. It's not allowed for altar. Okay, so what are these? So we go back to the shor and iskal category. But in this case, there was only one witness, so it couldn't be convicted. Okay, so it's not going to be convicted because all we have is one witness. Or the owner admitted. And Rashi says, why does this matter? Well, if the owner admits that it happened, right, we say, Hoda'at ba'al din k'mei edim, it's like 100 witnesses, so why don't we kill the shor? Well, Rashi claims, and some of the commentaries go against Rashi on this because they say, where'd you get this from? That, okay, let's go back to one principle before we read Rashi. There's something called modeh b'knas patur. If I admit to a fine, I'm exempt. Let's say I admit that I stole something. So when you steal an item, you have to return the item and you have to pay double. But the double is a fine, a penalty. I don't have to pay the penalty. I just have to return the item. It's a way to motivate people to admit things in court. So Rashi says that because modeh b'knas patur, this is modeh b'knas. Okay? Some of the commentators, I don't know where Rashi gets it, that the fact that we have to kill the shor is a knas. But Rashi claims that that's the reason, which makes sense in the context here, because why else would it matter if he admitted on his own that why wouldn't we kill the shor? Rovea v'nirba, that's an animal that engages in bestiality, either initiates, that's a rovea, or a man initiated the bestiality on the animal, nirba. Okay, that's considered despicable, and we don't allow that kind of animal to go on the altar, nor an animal that killed a person. Muktzah, okay, but again, an animal that killed a person that wasn't convicted or can't be convicted because we don't have enough witnesses, or right, they don't get killed. So because of that, there's no isur hana. It doesn't fall into the category of shor and iskal. So it's not in category 1, it's in this category. Muktzah v'ne'avad, something that was designated for idol worship but wasn't yet used. Something that was worshipped. Okay, that's a little difficult because generally we say that actually is forbidden b'hana'ah, but the commentaries try to grapple with exactly what case this is. Some sort of something that was designated for idol worship or worship. Be'etnan u'mechir, these are other things that the Torah says explicitly cannot go on the altar. If it was a gift given as for the prostitute, to a prostitute, you can't bring that as a sacrifice. That's disgusting. And a mechir kelev, they didn't like dogs, right? Dogs were considered a bad thing. If you sold a dog for this, you bought a dog for this animal, or you traded it, bartered it for an animal. This animal for a dog, this animal can't be brought on the altar either. That's all in one pasuk. The etnan and the mechir kelev, both of them are told you cannot go on the altar. Kilayim, okay, this is darshan from a pasuk. It says when you bring these animals for sacrifice, it says shor or kesef, which comes to exclude. It has to be either a shor or a kesef. Okay, we're now at the top of Amud Bet. It can't be a combo, so an animal that was a crossbreed of two animals, or a treifa, an animal, right? Just like it's not kosher if it has something that's going to make it die within 12 months, or again, depending on how exactly you define treifa, and that animal can't go on the altar. And a yotze dofen. That's an animal born by C-section, because it says in the pasuk shor or kesef, the one we just quoted, ki yivaled. It's a pasuk that says it has to be 7 days with its mother, and only on the 8th day can you offer it as a sacrifice. So that pasuk is talking about bringing it as a sacrifice as ki yivaled, when it's born. That means regular birth, not by C-section. So all these animals, for different reasons, right? They're not all. That's why it's a little difficult. The Rashi says this nevdabo avera as the topic sentence. Not exactly, not all of these had a sin happen to it, right? Being born C-section is not a sin, but it definitely explains some of the first ones. All these animals, again, what's unique about them? They're not like the first category. They're not forbidden to benefit from, but they can't go on the altar. So if your animal that you designate to go on the altar gets mixed up with, right, it doesn't matter how many, but however many and however many, again, it's not clear which is the plural, which is the which is more, which is less, but because it says plural by all of them, Zevachim, that nit arvu, right, they got mixed up with, it actually sounds like with one shor, dabo avera, okay, or this one sounds more like in one of them, but either which way, what do? You'll see later that it sounds like it's only one sacrifice, because it says yir'u ad sheyistavu. You leave them to graze until they get a blemish. Because what's the problem? Now, here's another issue. Another issue is if you have something that's sanctified to go on the altar and you want to redeem it, you can't. You can't redeem an animal that you want to go on the altar, because the best idea is to just redeem it. And then, right, you could just turn everything into money, take the money and buy sacrifices with it, and you're good. The problem is you can't do that unless it can't go on the altar anymore. When can an animal not go on the altar? Once it's blemished. So you leave these animals to graze until they get a blemish. This is a much better scenario than the metot, right? That's they say, I believe it's halacha l'Moshe Messina, this chamesh chatot metot. But in most cases, you can leave them to graze, and then yimachlu, you sell them. And then, so now let's say you sold. Now let's say there's 10 animals, and you have one sacrifice in there. And right, the rest are forbidden to go on the altar. So once they graze, you can basically just turn it into money. Take the money, and then now of this whole mixture, what are you obligated? One sacrifice. So let's say you sell the animals all for a bit of a different price. Okay, 100, 70, 80, 90, whatever it is. So now when you take the money, well, one animal sold for 100. So you have to take 100, and with that buy a new animal. Let's say you owed an ola, a burnt offering. So you take $100, and which was the cost of the most expensive animal there that you sold. So you sold that. You take $100 from that whole gotcha money that you have, and you buy a korban ola with that money, because maybe the most expensive animal was your korban. So you have to at least take out the same amount as, the most expensive animal. Third case, nit'arvu bechulin tamimin. What if they just get mixed up with regular non-sanctified animals? So in this case, there's no problem offering them on the altar, right? Whereas the previous case, we had a problem, we couldn't offer them on the altar. So what do? Yimachru hachulin l'tzarchei to'amin. You sell all those chulin for, and as you sell all the animals, because you don't know which is chulin and which is not. You sell them, all those animals, to people who want to bring sacrifices. That kind of sacrifice. So let's say you burn a burnt offering. You sell all the animals. Let's say it's 10 animals, right? And only one was your sacrifice. You sell all 10 animals to people who want to bring korbanot olah. It seems like, although they don't say this, like you have to buy one of them because you still have to bring a korban. So you kind of have to buy a new animal, have everyone else buy olot from them. And then what do? Okay, so it doesn't exactly say this, but Rashi tells us here, and it's based on the next case. Okay, now there's a bit of a problem because now what's going to happen? You're going to take these 10 animals and 10 different people are going to bring these animals as sacrifices on the altar. Well, if you bring one of them, you're the owner of the one who got mixed up. And all these other people bring, but we don't know which one is which. So you might have brought the wrong sacrifice. It wasn't yours. Now, what's the problem? When the Kohen does it, l'shem, for you, it's a problem. Remember, we learned about the psul of shinoi baalim. If they bring it for the wrong person, it's a problem. So how do we resolve this issue? So Rashi says, in the middle of the Dibor Matchil, it says, nitarvu b'chulin tmimin. After that, it says, yimachru is the Dibor Matchil. In the middle of that, Rashi says, toward the end, v'yikarvu kulan kol echad ve'echad l'shem mishahu. The Kohen says, this is for whoever it's supposed to be for. And that way, okay, now you might say it sounds a little silly, but it doesn't, because remember what Rabbi Yossi said in the very beginning of the Masechet, and we saw it also in the middle of the Masechet, that he said on Daf Bet Amud Bet, I believe it was, that, right, it's a T'nai Beitin, right, T'nai Beitin hu admi de lo lema lishmo, right, don't say things lishmo, because maybe you'll mess up. So you just say, this is l'shem, whoever's korban this is for. And in that way, well, you don't want to say stam, because stam will go for the person who gave it to you. That's also not good. So you have to say, it's l'shem, whoever the owner is, or you say, this is for the owner. And then you leave it very vague, but it covers you. Okay, then that Rashi got from the next case, because in the next case they spell it out. Case 4, kodshim bekodshim, min b'mido. Let's say you have a whole bunch of sacrifices that got mixed up. We all, 10 of us, needed to bring korbanot olah, or korbanot, again, could be shlamim, could be chata, whatever it is. And all the animals got mixed up. So what do? Now, min b'mino means they're all the same kind of sacrifice. So they're all being brought, let's say, as korbanot olah. So that's easy. If they're mixed up and it's shlamim and chatat, well, then the Kohen doesn't know how to sacrifice them, right? First of all, the rules are different for the different sacrifices. How many matanot, where you do it, all sorts of things are different. But if they're all the same, so then the Kohen just brings them all as olot. Zeh yikrav l'shem mishahu, v'zeh yikrav l'shem mishahu. And here is where the Gemara says explicitly. The Gemara just says, the Mishnah says that the Kohen brings it, l'shem, whoever it's for. So he brings all those sacrifices and you're good. Next one. Kodshim b'kodshim min b'she'eno mina. You can figure they're getting to this one. What if they're not the same type? You have olot, shlamim, chatat, whatever they are mixed up together. Yir'u ad sheyistavu. So you have to leave them to graze. Okay, now, till they get a blemish. Okay, because what's the problem? You can't bring them all as olot, or you can't bring them all as shlamim. Okay, I see you're asking, do they bring them all at once? I don't even think they need to bring them all at once. I don't think that makes a difference here, because as long as they bring them and the Kohen says it's whoever it's for, then they're covered. So I don't think you have to bring them all at once. So now, I just want to check one footnote here. Okay, so the word yimachru has a footnote by it, but I think it's part of here anyway. So you leave them to graze, then what do? Once they get a blemish, you can sell them. And once you sell them, what do you do with the money? Well, what did we learn before? If you have it mixed up with things that, right, with things that you can't bring on the altar. So only one of them, let's say, or whatever many of them were sacrifices needed to be bought. So you take the most expensive animals and you buy the sacrifices with them. In this case, they're all sacrifices. So what do? You don't know how much the shlamim was worth and how much the chatat was worth and how much the olah was worth. So here you're going to have a financial loss. Because you say we're going to have to buy yavim midmei hayafeh shebehen mimin zeh ubidmei hayafeh shebehen mimin zeh. We have to bring the most expensive for the sin offering, the most expensive for the olah, the most expensive for the shlamim, because maybe they were all right? Because maybe the shlamim was the most expensive one, maybe the ola was, maybe. Okay, so you have to do that. The yafsidam mutar beito, and the rest is just a loss. The person has to take a loss. Now, it could be people have to take a loss. It could be it wasn't necessarily all my korbanot, right? It could have been other people's korbanot, and then we all have to, I guess, chip in together to pay for the difference. Doesn't really say. Now we get to one more scenario. Last scenario of the Mishnah. We have another thing we're going to throw in here. In general, we've been redeeming these animals, right? We take them until they have a blemish, we sell them, right? And we remove the sanctity from those animals, right? We move it on to money. But there's two animals that you can't remove the sanctity of by selling them. Why not? Well, Bechor and Maaser. In those cases, the firstborn was designated as the firstborn. You can't switch a firstborn for a non-firstborn or even for a firstborn. It has sanctity from the moment it was born. So you can't just redeem that, okay? And so you can't say, oh, let it get a blemish, sell it, redeem it, right, something else. Maaser, you also can't sell because Maaser is you count 10 and the 10th is it. That's the one. You can't just switch it. It's different than when I just choose a random animal for my sacrifice. That's different. So if your sacrifice got mixed up with a Bechor and a Maaser, or a Bechor or a Maaser, Yir'u ad shistavu, so you leave it to graze. Now, then, what it doesn't say here, which it should say, but the commentaries add it, which is you then take the money again of the most expensive, right? You take the most expensive animal, and this time, though, you can't sell them. So once they're blemished, now we're going to talk about what happens with the Bechor and the Maaser, but once it's blemished, you redeem it onto money. You don't sell it, but you redeem, and now you have a mixture, okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to take the most expensive animal there, take its value, turn it into money. And in that way, it's not even the most expensive animal. It's the most expensive amount of what your animal could be. And basically with that, you're going to remove the sanctity. You don't know which animal, but you can do that. You can say, I'm removing the sanctity of whichever animal was the ola. Let's say it was an ola. Okay, I'm removing the sanctity by putting in this money, and this money I'm going to take and buy a korban ola with. So that has to be the value of the most expensive animal in the batch. Now what are you left with? Well, you remove the sanctity from that animal because you can do that. You can redeem an animal once it's blemished. Remember, you can't redeem an animal that's supposed to go on the altar when it's not blemished. That you're not allowed to do. That's kodshem mizbeach. Can't touch that. But once it's blemished and it can't go on the altar anymore, you can redeem it and then bring another animal in its stead. So with that, you remove the kedusha of one animal that was your sacrifice. Then you're left with Bechor and Maaser that are blemished. And Bechor and Maaser that are blemished, you don't have to do anything with. Because the rules of Bechor and Maaser are, you have to bring them to the Beit HaMikdash. And the Maaser, you sacrifice yourself. The Bechor you give to a Kohen, and the Kohen has to sacrifice it. But when they're blemished, the Kohen can eat the Bechor, right? And the truth is anyone can really eat the Bechor, but it belongs to a Kohen, because you have to give it to a Kohen. And you can give it to him before it's blemished or after it's blemished, it doesn't matter, but it belongs to the Kohen. And the Maaser you can eat yourself. So any of these animals can be eaten now, because there's no prohibition to just slaughter them now, because they're blemished. So, therefore, you can now yachlu kebechor b'chemaser. So you can eat all these animals and assume they're no different than bechor and maaser. Because again, one has no sanctity at all because you've redeemed it. The one that was a sacrifice, you can just redeem its sanctity. And the bechor and the maaser can be eaten and slaughtered. Now there are certain rules about them. So whatever rules apply to bechor and maaser about what you could do with them, that still applies. But basically, you can slaughter them, which is what you're going to want to do, right? And you want to make these permitted, so you can do that. Now they just add one more line, which is just in side point. Hakol yecholin litarev. Okay, you can have all sorts of circumstances of sacrifices that get mixed up with other sacrifices, and you don't know what's what and who's who, because many sacrifices overlap what animals you could bring for this one or that one, except for min hachatat v'hasham. A chatat can never be brought from a ram. And an asham, in most ashams, there are some exceptions to the rule, but they mean the general korban asham, guilt offering is brought with a ram. So since an chatat cannot be a ram, and an asham can only be a ram, so you'll never have a combination of these, because unless you can't figure out what animal is what, which is obviously not, someone can figure it out even if you don't know the difference. But basically, you're not going to confuse a ram and a goat, for example, which is what usually you bring. A female goat or a sheep. There's certain animals you could bring for chatat, but you can't bring those same animals for an asham, and therefore they'll never have a problem of combination there because it'll be obvious which one was what. the commentaries say there's a few other exceptions to the rule of cases where you won't have ta'arovot. Okay, so basically what the Mishnah did is give a whole bunch of examples, and I'll just remind you now of the beginning ones because we got caught up with all the end ones of sacrifices. The beginning ones were things that couldn't be brought on the altar at all, right? Either first category was they're forbidden to benefit from, even not in the world of sacrifices, but you can't, and not only can they not be used on the altar, but you can't benefit from them at all, like the shor niskal and the chatot hametot. And then we got to the category of all these other things, like a gift given to a prostitute, or an item that was engaged in bestiality, or it just wasn't convicted because there wasn't enough evidence against a shor that killed someone. All these things that are inappropriate to bring on the altar, you can't bring them on the altar, but the truth is that people can benefit from them on the street and the regular world. Okay. So now the Gemara starts off with a question. The first question is, as I already mentioned when we learned the Mishnah, my afilu. Okay, they assume, like I said, that usually when you have ta'arovot, it means the first thing is mixed up in a lot of the others. So when it says one, let's just say it assumes one animal that you brought for a sacrifice got mixed up in even 10,000 shor niskals, it's not nullified. That's a weird afilu. That doesn't make any sense. So they say, my afilu, what is this afilu? So they say, fine, read the case differently. Hachi kamar, this is really what the Mishnah meant to say. Kol hazvachim shenidarvu behem chataot hametot o shor niskal, afilu echad beribo yamutu kulam. They switch the case. They say it's zvachim that got mixed up in the zvachim, chataot hametot o shor niskal, even one shor niskal or one chataot hametot. We have a group of sacrifices, animals for sacrifice, and got mixed up with them, even just one shor niskal or one chata'at shemeta, sin offering that has to be left to die. All of these, you could have 10,000, okay, they're obviously exaggerating, but could have 10,000 animals like that, you would have to leave them all to die. Just a big, right, a big loss, right? A loss for the world, a loss for sacrifice, right? It's a quite stringent halacha. It's basically saying there's no laws of nullification at all here. Now, the Gemara says, our next question is going to be, we're going to compare, okay, from here till the end of the daf, we're going to compare first a Mishnah in Tamura and then a Mishnah in Avodah Zarah. And our basic point is going to be, why do we need all these Mishnayot? They're all basically saying the same thing. And what is each one? We're going to have to identify what is each one coming to add that the other one didn't, because there's no reason to repeat Mishnayot, right? You might say, oh, well, good to have the Mishnah here, good to have the Mishnah there, but no, they don't like that. They like to say, once in a while, they'll say that, like, oh, well, this is its main topic, and they just mention that, by the way. And this is its main topic, and they mention that by the way. Okay, but usually we don't really like to repeat Mishnah. And it's a very common question the Gemara asks, why do we have this Mishnah and that Mishnah when they're both saying the same thing? So comes the Gemara and says, Tanina Chadazimna, it appears in a Mishnah in Tamura. Kol, right, even though we haven't gotten to it yet, they don't really care about order and everything's, right, it's not a book that reads from start to finish, so you could say, why this Mishnah if we already have that Mishnah, even though that Mishnah is later. Kol ha'asurim legabe mizbeach. Anything, now what they're really asking is on our first line. Our first line about the shor niskal and the chatot hametot, that they're not nullified in any amount whatsoever, sounds like this line also. Kol asurim legabe mizbeach, anything that's forbidden to go on the altar, osrim bekol shehen, if they get mixed up in a mixture, they forbid in any amount. It's like a term we know from chametz, Pesach, right? It's asur bekol sheh, that's why people go crazy about Pesach, right? Any crumb, a little bit amount, right, messes up. So also these are osurim bekol shehin, and they give some examples harovei avan yirba, like we saw in our Mishnah. Now it's actually more like category 2 in our Mishnah. We'll get back to that. But right now they're saying the same thing about echad b'ribo is not canceled. This is kol shu. It's the same thing. So why do we need both cases? But they are different cases, and that's what they're going to highlight. Our Mishnah, the first case, is talking about isurei hana'at, things that you can't benefit from, even outside the world of the Mizbeach. This is talking about, right, if I have an animal that engaged in bestiality, I could benefit from it, I could use it to work in my field if I want, I just can't bring it on the altar. So I'm Rav Ashi, but both of them are basically saying these animals are not nullified in any amount. So I'm Rav Ashi, Amarita l'shmata kamei Rav Shimi. He said, I went to Rav Shimi, I said this to Rav Shimi, va'atzrichan, and he told me why we needed it. Di'ime hatam, if there, hava minu, you might have thought, hanemile legavoa. There, what's the issue? I have an animal that can't go on the altar, so what's the problem, right? I now have this mixture of all these animals that can't go on the altar, so they're not nullified. Now, what would I do? Well, our Mishnah tells you what you do in that case, right? You leave them to graze, you turn them into money, right? And then you buy, with that money, the amount of sacrifices you had mixed in there, and the rest, right, are fine. So, that's because that's ligavoa, meaning you can actually benefit from them, though, after, right? Because those animals are not forbidden to benefit from, they just can't go on the altar. So there's a good solution to resolve that problem. Aval lehedyot emalo. But in our case, where they're going to be forbidden to hedyot, I'm now going to have to leave, okay, in the extreme case, 10,000 animals to die because there's nothing we could do with them, right? There's no solution. So maybe it's actually ironic, right? Because our case is much more stringent because the item is forbidden b'hana'ah. So you could see you'd be more stringent about it. But now they're suggesting maybe you'd be more lenient because, and for good reason, right? We don't want to let 10,000 animals just die, right? Or 100 or 10 or whatever it might be. So, in Tmura, it just can't go on the altar. But then you can leave them to graze, even though it doesn't say that in Tmura. But we know from our Mishnah, you can leave them to graze. You can pay the amount of the most, sell them, pay the amount of the most expensive one, buy a sacrifice, and the rest are fine. So there's a much better solution. So maybe that's where we'll be strict and we won't allow laws of nullification. But remember, the Torah says things are nullified in the majority. So why don't we just say, put back Torah law, the basic halacha, that nullification works, in a case where we're going to otherwise have to leave animals to die. So that's why you might have thought it won't apply, and that's why we needed our Mishnah to tell us, no, even in that case, there's no laws of nullification here. Now we're going to do the reverse logic. Imehacha, if you had our case, what would you have said? Now we go back to what you would have intuitively said. Our case is much more strict, right? Because it's asur, even outside the temple, it's forbidden. So if you would learn from us, Havamina, you would say, Hani hu di isurei hana'aninu. These are forbidden b'hana'ah even outside the temple. So of course we're going to be strict with them. They're worse. Shor and iskal and chata'odam are much worse. Aval hane emalo, but maybe things that are forbidden just to benefit from, maybe they'd be nullified. And that's why it's tzricha. That's why you need them both. But that's not a good enough answer because our Mishnah also talks about that case. The case in Tmura is case 2 in our Mishnah. First, we're comparing the main case in Tmura, right, the one case in Tmura, to case 1 in our Mishnah. There were 2 different cases, right? Ours was forbidden to benefit, and theirs are not forbidden to benefit outside the temple. And then we made the comparison why you would need both. But now they say, but we don't understand Tmura because the lavi surana aninu hatanile. Ones that are not surana actually already says in our Mishnah. So you really, first they said, why do you need our Mishnah if you have the Mishnah in Tmura? And then by answering it, we had to say why you need really both. And why it wasn't enough just to have ours, why it wasn't enough just to have that one. But now we're saying, but you don't even need that case in Tmura because that's case 2 in our Mishnah. And our Mishnah tells you exactly what to do, right? Leave it to graze, all that, which actually it didn't say in Tmura. So why would you need the Mishnah in Tmura then if you have our Mishnah? Mi katane bekama, kol sheken hatam katane. Well, our Mishnah doesn't mention, if you noticed, the echami ribo, how much, right? It says even 1 in 10,000 is only by the shor and the skal and the chatot and metot, the first case, where it's forbidden to benefit. The second case doesn't actually tell you. It just tells you here's the solution. But maybe you would think it's nullified in some amount. It just doesn't tell you what the amount is. But the amount is mentioned in Tmura. That's what you need Tmura for, to tell you the amount. In Tmura it says, B'kol shein, they forbid any tarovet, just like the first case in our Mishnah, but it didn't say it by the second case in our Mishnah. Okay, so you need Tmura. Tmura adds something that's not in our Mishnah. Now, obviously, the question is, why didn't our Mishnah just add it? That's a good question. But they're operating on the assumption that we have this Mishnah, we have this Mishnah. What's the new law in each Mishnah that's not mentioned in the other? So fine. So in Tmura, it says, if it's just something that can't go on the altar, which is exactly the language of the Mishnah there, Kol Asurim, whatever. I'm just going back to the Mishnah for a second. Sorry, I just lost it. Right. Kol asurim legabei mizbeach, anything that's forbidden to go on the altar, which is our category, our case 2 in our Mishnah. And there it tells you the amount that even any one, in doesn't matter how many, is not nullified. So now the question is, okay, well, v'nitne havalo b'ayha. So then why do you need our Mishnah? Again, case 2 in our Mishnah now is unnecessary. Case 1, we explain why it was necessary. Case 2 now would be unnecessary. To which they say no, because what's not mentioned in the Mishnah in Tmura, and this I already mentioned a few times, Takanta itzrichale. Our Mishnah tells you the resolution. How do you solve the problem? So yes, it's not nullified at all, but there's a way out. You wait till it gets a blemish. You then take the money of the most expensive animal. You buy a sacrifice with it, and then the rest, right, can be used by whoever for whatever, just not brought on the altar. So that's an answer as to why we need that and that. Now they're going to throw in another Mishnah. Okay. Mishnah from Avodah Zarah, which you might remember because we learned it not so long ago. Now, if we go back to Rav Shimi, what did Rav Shimi say? Rav Shimi's whole thing was that you needed to teach you that these are forbidden also, that they're not nullified, meaning you can't bring them as a sacrifice, but maybe you would think that in order to resolve this problem, we don't want to let them die, maybe we'll allow them to hedyot to a regular person. So if a shor and iskal gets mixed up with your animals for sacrifices, so you might not be able to bring them on the altar, that for sure, but maybe we'd allow them maybe we could let them get blemished, do what we did in category 2. Let them get blemished, redeem them, take the money, buy sacrifices, and with the remainder, or whatever, and then those animals already can be used by people. And maybe we should, right? And then, so now they're going to say, how do we know? And again, maybe we want to be lenient here because because we don't want to destroy them completely, because these are things that are forbidden to hedyot. What's the logic here? It's true that there's mixed in here a shor and iskal, but maybe we could use laws of nullification to say as if it's not there, right? That's the idea, because if we don't say that, we're going to have to leave it to die. We don't want to do that. So let's just say laws of nullification would kick in here. And that's why you needed both Mishnayot. But now they're saying, wait a minute, the hedyot, you don't need it to teach you that, because that actually appears in another Mishnah that you can't do that. Laws of nullification do not permit anything that's isur b'hana'ah, like an animal. Okay, how do we know this? Ve'elu asurim ve'oslim b'kol. Because there's a list in Avodah Zarah that says this explicitly. These are things that are forbidden, and forbidden any amount, and they're never nullified. And unfortunately, the Gemara doesn't bring the rest of the Mishnah, but it brings Yei Nesech, Yei Nesech, right, wine that was used as a libation, and Avodah Zarah, and Shor HaNiskal. Okay, they don't bring it, but that's the obvious reason why they're bringing this. And this Shor HaNiskal is never nullified. So you already know it's not nullified, even for, right, even if it's not mixed up with sacrifices, so not nullified at all. All the more so if it's mixed up with sacrifices, right, we're not going to, even if there's a solution, you could wait till they get blemished and deal with the sacrifices. But that will never be nullified in a mixture, and that all those animals are forbidden to benefit from, and that's why they have to be left to die. So we already know that. We don't need our Mishnah to tell us that. So now we're back with, right, we thought we needed our Mishnah to teach us that halacha that we couldn't have gotten from Tmura, but we actually could have learned it from Avodah Zarah. So now we're left with the question, and we'll get to the answer tomorrow. You can already see it starts with a tzricha. Well, you needed it because, and we'll see tomorrow what the because is. So what we did today is we discussed a whole slew of cases of mixtures and what we do in each unique situation and what the unique parameters of each of those situations are, right? And none of them really nullification works. And except for this one case that we said it's a mixture that's not actually going to be forbidden at all because you know what's what and it's not even a mixture, and that's chata and nasha getting mixed up together. But we went through all the cases, then we dealt with the language of the afilu, which made no sense, and we had to switch, which was more, which was less. And then we had this whole question, how does our Mishnah fit into the slew of Mishnayot in Tmura and Mishnah in Tmura, Mishnah in Avodah Zarah, which also, if you put them together, right, you kind of get everything. You don't really need our Mishnah. What's the purpose of our Mishnah? What is each line coming? What are the first two cases really? First we start with the first case, then the second case, and got back to the first case. What's it really saying that we couldn't have learned otherwise? With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day. A much simpler daf, easier to understand, and like I said, has more broader ramifications in terms of how we deal with laws of mixtures in general. Wishing everyone a good day.